Nightshade AKA Eve Eden has a pretty interesting comic book history, especially that she doesn't actually originate from DC Comics. Instead, Nightshade, along with heroes Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, The Question, Peacemaker, and others, actually come from Charlton Comics, that which was later bought by DC. She debuted in Captain Atom issue 82 from 1966. Also, this is not the Captain Atom you might think of. The shiny silver one is actually a character who started as DC. This one is the brown spandex guy. And it's fun fact, mistaken to be the same character more than you'd expect. Nightshade's origin is actually pretty confusing, which might be a reason that while she might have fans including myself, she never really managed to keep up with other Charlton characters like Blue Beetle and The Question. When Eve was just a little girl, her mother revealed to her and her brother that Eve was actually a princess from the Nightshade dimension. But her mother was forced to flee to Earth with her children because of a man named Incubus. And because of their heritage, Eve is actually capable of shadow powers. But when Incubus returns, he kills her mother and Eve wasn't able to say goodbye, and her brother was kidnapped by Incubus. The character afterwards would become the superior Nightshade and would marry a man named Warren. However, they would divorce pretty early on in their marriage, as Nightshade was then able to tell Warren the true reveal of her being a superhero. She later be trained in martial arts by a judo master. Yes, the same one from Peacemaker. Eve would then join the CIA, with having now father issues, who was, for some unknown reason, absent for a lot of her origin. No real explanation is given why her father is now just here, but it makes sense that we all knew that she must have had a father, because that's how it works. However, it is a little weird here, as her brother is still been kidnapped by Incubus, yet isn't really mentioned for a little while. Now, after decades of what was actually decades, Nightshade has now finally decided to remember she had a brother, this being in the 70s, and would team up with this era's Captain Atom, trying to get into the Nightshade realm to save him, but never managed to find a way. And that would be the end of the Charlton Comics, with the company going bankrupt and the characters would be acquired by DC Comics, and we introduced into their own stories post-Crisis on Infinite Earth, where being revealed all those stories had taken place on Earth 4. Post-Crisis, she was now on the same Earth as heroes like Superman and Batman. Also, her entire origin stayed the same except for one slight change, and that was that her mom now was named Marian, while it was once Magda. I'm not entirely sure why that was changed, but it was. Nightshade was actually pretty lucky due to the fact that a lot of Charlton characters not ever being really imagined or reimagined as DC characters. Due to the fact that, for example, Captain Atom was a completely different character. Different design, different powers, different origin, different everything. Not a single thing stayed the same except for his symbol and his name. Also, his actual name, that being his real name, was now Nate Adams, not Alan Adams, who were established to be different characters, while Alan Adams didn't seem to exist anymore. Well, at first at least. Alan Adams would eventually return, but would be very different. It had been Captain Atom long before Nate Adam, who was also, for some unknown reason, sometimes named Nate Adams, or just Nate Adam. The characters, however, like I said, are very different characters. And Nate Adam, for the most part, has completely eclipsed Alan Adams from existence, as I don't think anyone even remembers he existed at one point. Meanwhile, The Question and Blue Beetle would still have existed, that being Vic Sage and Ted Kord versions of them. However, they would be replaced later on by Renee Montoya and Jaime Reyes. But unlike Alan Adam, Vic and Ted still remained as comic book characters and were very popular. And while The Question specifically has definitely lost in popularity to their successor, that being Renee Montoya, Ted and Jaime Reyes actually now coexist as the Blue Beetle. Judo Master also was replaced by Sonia Sato, however neither of them really were all too popular. But that might be different now because Sonya did appear on Stargirl and Judo Master was on Peacemaker. However, like I said, neither of them were ever that popular, so it's hard to say. And as for Peacemaker, his character will be killed off during Crisis, and while he did kind of return, he never managed to hold his own, and would soon be just to be dubbed a failed character after an attempt to do something with him. And I mean, there was a lot of attempts. From Vigilante, from Villain, from Checkmate, but luckily he would find his footing in 2021 due to the Suicide Squad movie where the character would finally stick. It would get his own TV show, and the character after that is kind of a big deal now. Which is really surprising, considering the fact that the character at one point was thought to be one of the most, not necessarily disliked, but unnecessary characters in all of DC Comics. That's not a joke. At one point, his character was thought to be just an addition that was unnecessary. So when you think about it, Nightshade is very lucky that she was never replaced, erased, origin was never altered, and kept being the same person, and didn't have a very different backstory or really anything. So Nightshade, like I said, very lucky that she was not really tinkered with at all. Nightshade's motivation for her previous story was kept, and she made a deal with Amanda Waller to join the Suicide Squad in exchange for the team coming with her to the Nightshade dimension to save her brother and face Incubus. Yes, it's the same Incubus that is Enchantress's brother and was in the first Suicide Squad movie. Afterwards, Nightshade became one of the main members of the Suicide Squad, and while the character did start off as a hero, the fact that she was on the team at all made her have a bit of a reputation by writers that were unaware of the character's history, that the reason why she was part of the Suicide Squad was because she was one of the villains. The reason why that was a thing was because a lot of people just presumed the Suicide Squad was only villains, when the reality was they were actually not all villains when the team was first conceived. Instead, heroes Vixen, Bronze Tiger, Rift Flag, and Enchantress were all members. However, Bronze Tiger and Enchantress were also dubbed villains, and Vixen only had a short time on the team before joining Justice League, so most people forgot that part of her history. However, during a mission with the Suicide Squad, she would end up being possessed by a demon, which is actually how she got her pale white skin. After being freed, she would leave the Suicide Squad and join forces of Blue Devil, Enchantress, Shining Knight, Ragman, and Detective Chimp to form the Shadow Pact in order to defeat the Spectre. However, during Bright's day, Eclipso would possess her, making the second time she was taken over by a demon. Then came the New 52. In the New 52, Nightshade was surprisingly absent. For example, there are numerous comics that she could have appeared in, but never did, like the Suicide Squad, Captain Atom, Justice League Dark, any magical title. Like I said, she never appeared in any of them, nor was she even mentioned. However, there was a character named Avea, aka the Second Shadow Thief, whose powers and design looks very similar to Nightshade. And while it was never confirmed if that was intentional, it is a little hard to ignore. Avea was even a government operative like Nightshade. So I would argue perhaps that was intentional, but yet again, it could have been a coincidence that they just had a lot of similarities. In Rebirth, the character would exist, and we would see her fight Slade. We don't really know much about the character, as she only really had cameo appearances like in Doomsday Clock or a minor role in Justice League Dark. However, we do know that she has her old costume, but also her new one too, as in Doomsday Clock she wears her old costume, but more or less in a modern day type attire. While in the Justice League Dark comics, she wears her newer costume, but now has pale skin rather than, actual Snow White skin. And then came this promo art. This is promo art for what is to come in DC a couple years ago. Well, I think only 2. It shows Black Adam and Naomi joining the Justice League, Peacemaker bleeding back in the comics since he's been gone a while, Superboy joining the Suicide Squad. But among the Suicide Squad, we see a pale-skinned, raven-haired woman. Majority of fans had anticipated to be Nightshade, only to be very much disappointed when they learned that it was actually Nocturna. Nocturna and Nightshade do have, I think, similar looks. However, Nightshade, weirdly, I think, doesn't really have a standard look because she keeps changing. Nocturna, or Natalie Knight, is a fake vampire in the same vein as Morbius. She started off as a gold digger trying to adopt Jason Todd and seduce Batman into becoming her sugar daddy. Yes, that was a thing. But in the New 52, she'd be reimagined as more of an actual vampire who had run-ins with Batwoman. Word, she'd actually rape her. Yeah, that was also a thing. The character is most known for a never-happening episode of Batman the Animated Series that was planned to have her as a villain but was scrapped. And for her episode on Batwoman. Back to Nightshade. She's appeared in adaptations. She's appeared in the 90s Flash show, however weirdly male, and seems to be an amalgamation of Nightshade and the Sandman. As the character does visually bear a lot of resemblance to the Sandman, but is named Nightshade and has more or less a power set similar to her. He's framed for a crime in an episode and helps the Flash fight the deadly Nightshade, who's the villain of the episode. She would also appear in Superman Batman Poke Enemies in a role that is very confusing, that is, she's for some unknown reason a villain. As she is one of the first villains to appear under control of Grodd to fight Superman and Batman along with Super Banshee, Solomon Grundy, Killer Frost, Mr. Freeze, Ice Cold, Captain Cold, and Mongol. And she'd appear in DC Showcase Blue Beetle depicted as far more like her Charlton self, along with wearing a more modified version of her first suit. She's also the inspiration for Retrospective, the Watchmen comic with Dr. Manhattan being Captain Atom, Rorschach as The Question, Owlman as Blue Beetle, the Comedian's Peacemaker, and I'm not entirely sure what Ozymandias is meant to be. I looked for the answer, and while I don't know if this is true, as Comic Vine says, is Thunderbolt a Charlton character who was even less popular than Peacemaker? However, I don't see the similarities at all. I mean, they both got that weird block mask head band thing, but that's the only thing. One's a super genius, the other's a dude who talks to animals. I don't really see the similarities between Ozymandias and the Thunderbolt. I'll be honest, I really like her character, but she is a little confusing when it comes down to her origin. I think she deserves more than she is given as being misremembered as a villain for some reason. Like she so often weirdly is. Being on the list of titles like coolest female villains, but through her entire history, she was only a villain in that one animated movie. Also, I wonder what costume you guys prefer. Personally, I like the bluish purple one because I think it makes her powers seem more mysterious, and her more mysterious by proxy. Well, I think the golden blue one makes her seem more like a hero from the 60s, which while I know she is one, I feel like it makes her seem too much like Silk Spectre, even if I know that Silk Spectre copied her first. But I think the evolution of Nightshade into a more magical, mysterious character is interesting and unique-ish. However, I suppose one could argue she is a bit similar to Teen Titan member Raven, who's also half-demon. Well, I don't know if Nightshade could technically be considered a demon, but I do, because they are from a realm called the Nightshade realm, which sounds very demonish to me. And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and see you guys next time. Bye!